Saleem Beg, S. Janakarajan, Nityanand Jayaraman in conversation with Gopal Gandhi. May I request you gentlemen to please come on stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, the subject of this segment of the morning session is floods. The impact of floods has, in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, had one extremely remarkable and extremely regrettable aspect to it. And that is that the floods in Srinagar were very close to the elections that were to take place in that state. And the elections saw, I'm speaking for myself, to my great disappointment and regret, the defeat of the government headed by Omar Abdullah. I would like to express the hope that our city will one day welcome you back, Mr. Abdullah, not only as the leader of your state, but in a preeminent position in our country, perhaps the Prime Minister of India. We have had in Chennai a flood of which, since this is a literary festival, of which the author was nature, but the copyright holder was the city. It is not what fell from the skies, but how the ground received what fell from the skies that caused the floods. A very similar thing, I believe, happened in Srinagar. Cities have become concrete jungles with waterways and marshes and ponds and tanks and riverbeds and floodplains around those having disappeared, making anything like rain beyond normal levels impossible for the city to absorb. What results is what we went through in Chennai, very, very unusual in living memory. And what also happened very similarly in Srinagar, but 10 years prior to that in Ladakh, and somewhere in between in Uttarakhand. So what we are going to discuss today, listening to people who have expertise on the subject, is not just how we felt and what we went through, but what can be done to prevent similar things from happening in the future. Climate change is a fact, but the change in the texture of our cities is also a fact. And if we are going to have deluges, we better know how we are going to face them. What has happened is not just a matter of inundation, destruction, immobilization, paralysis, but also something deeply existential. Because we have seen how the way in which we, and all of us included in that we, have allowed urbanization to strangulate life, and this is lit for life, how urbanization has strangulated life and choked its lungs is not an engineering matter alone. It is a deeply existential matter. And what really ultimately caused the flood in Chennai, and Mr. Saleem Beg will tell us what happened in Srinagar, is about simple, plain greed on the part of developers exploiting cash hunger on the part of all sections of society to obfuscate life. So it is really a question of where we are headed, not just in terms of how our drainage systems have to be repaired, but how our attitude to life in cities is to be changed. What we are in effect going to discuss today is the need for the possibility of a fundamental change in the way in which cities conduct their lives. We will start with a presentation by Mr. Saleem Beg on what happened in Srinagar in September 2014, which the whole world observed with disbelief, because that city just ground to a halt when every possible way and means and method of communication evaporated, something which we realized in those unforgettable days of December, late November and early December, when Chennai suddenly regressed to the Middle Ages, when there was no electricity, no communication, no way of reaching anyone anywhere, and life stood still. Saleem sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's really thoughtful of the organizers to have focused on vulnerabilities of cities and vulnerabilities of very vulnerable areas in an event like a literary festival. For me, it was gratifying as a fellow Kashmiri to find Kashmir focused in the keynote so eloquently done by former Chief Minister, Mr. Omar Abdullah. Now, when we talk of Srinagar city, the city is part of a Himalayan valley, a continuous land stretch, and it's flooded as other parts of the valley, but Srinagar receives more waters, accumulates more waters and more damage for two reasons. One, it is the longest deep land stretch in the valley, as also the highly populated, densely populated area. September 2014 floods have been classified as extreme of extremes, which means that the floods were a disaster, a natural disaster, which perhaps could not have been avoided. The flood waters in Jhelum were recorded as 135,000 cusecs, as against the normal flow of 35,000 cusecs. The loss damage of these floods made initially, which is an estimate, was about 1 lakh crores. Now, 1 lakh crores doesn't look to be a very huge amount, but when you consider it, it's 115% of that year's, preceding year's state's GDP, then you can understand the kind of disaster it would have meant for the people living there. The number of structures which were damaged is about 2.4 lakhs. The state, immediately after floods, prepared a rehabilitation plan, which was pegged at about 44,000 crores, which is not a reinstatement plan, which only would have rehabilitated or restored part of the damage which has taken place. Now, Kashmir Valley is a bowl, as I said, is a valley, not a hugely spread out land. And you can, sorry. Yeah. The Jhelum River flows from south to north. The only river which drains out the surplus water out of the valley is this river, which is receiving water from other smaller rivers, which are tributaries, and the total number would be 24. The rainfall data collected from the IMD for those 5 days, for those 10 days, 28 to 10 September, in south of Kashmir is about 1645 millimeters. South of Kashmir is the area where from we get waters into the city. The city is the central part of Kashmir, then we have southern part, which is the upper catchment, and the northern part, which is the lower catchment. The valley has been facing floods over decades and centuries. It's not something which happened for the first time in Kashmir. And mind you, these floods have generally not been flash floods like we saw in Uttarakhand or like we saw in Ladakh a couple of years back, as was referred to by Mr. Gopal Gandhi. The rainfall in the upper reaches of the valley accumulates, and one can, with reasonable assessment and reasonable analysis and exercise, foretell to a large extent that Srinagar city on such and such date or around such and such date would get these floods. And there were certain traditional methods by which one would usually calculate these things. An ecosystem was created in Kashmir, both by nature as also for a city like Srinagar, by digging in canals and distributing the flood waters of the city. This is a Srinagar city map. Now this map is very important because one of it is created out of geospatial data available and one is a satellite map. 1911 map shows, this is map of Srinagar city, the wetlands as also the lakes in the city. The other map, which is 1911, has a similar layout, but it only shows most of the wetlands in the city, and the waters and lakes have almost vanished. City as such is a marsh, not a very ideal place for a population like the one we have in Srinagar city, but that is how it has historically grown. What happened in the process is that the wetlands were somehow vanished and gave way to colonies. City for Kashmiris in their collective memory was something which was watery, which had most of the mass was consisting of canals and water. There's an interesting map here, which is drawn somewhere in very early 19th century, presented to the British Empire. And this map will show you how watery the city would look, even in the memory of common Kashmiris. And these are photographs of wetlands and marshy lands, which were part of the lay and the landscape of Srinagar. Now, coming 20th century, tackling floods, which was something very well known to people there, was intervened. Wetlands were filled, converted into housing colonies. Floods at that point in time became an engineering issue. If there's a loose embankment or a weak embankment, you perhaps pour in more concrete. That will sort out the matter. I don't know where it finally started, but the major interventions of conversion of wetlands into housing colonies were started by the state government, when officially colonies were laid in areas which were erstwhile wetlands. Now, if you see from this map, The flood waters of Srinagar and of South Kashmir get stored in a lake which is known as Wolar Lake. It is our flood sink, it is our sea. It is the only large water body which absorbs floods. When you go to the Wolar Lake, on the left side, we have an image of Wolar Lake, which is about 30 years back. And the right side of the image shows what has happened to this flood sink. And mind you, this is the only mass or only water, shallow space available for absorbing or storing the floods. It has been encroached. The wetlands of the Wolar have been converted into agricultural land, and marts are no longer there. The total water mass has also shrunk, which you can make out from the map here. Sorry. Better. Yeah. This is the statistics related to Wolar. Why I am emphasizing on shrinkage of Wolar Lake is that even now when we are talking of carrying whole water, bypassing the sea to this lake, which is so heavily reduced both in terms of the water area and the marsh area that it is hardly going to absorb any further flow of water. At times, I mean, this flood also threw up certain questions for which I don't know who would have the answer. Certainly the government would not have an answer. The method of forecasting the flood, the method of measuring the water volumes is at least a century old in Kashmir. We still have a gauge which says the water level at such and such point is so much in terms of feet, which is measured in Srinagar. If we had really taken into account 3 parameters, one is the rainfall. As I said, it was not a flash flood, it was a cumulative effect of the rain. If we also had forecast with us, which we had, we also know the control levels of Srinagar city, perhaps we could have substantially predicted the water levels of the Srinagar and perhaps taken certain precautionary measures. Somehow we thought this is something which is not required, therefore it didn't exist. And when we were faced with the flood, we knew what it would have meant to us had we known in another 24 hours water levels would be at a particular level. We were simply not ready for the response, and that is something which speaks volumes about how complacent we had become. Earlier on, without floods, Kashmir Valley had a system by which each district development commissioner, who is the deputy commissioner or the collector of the city, would be chairman of a flood committee. He would start rehearsing floods sometime around May. Then make provision for boats, make provision for sandbags, make provisions for supplies, make provisions for relief and rescue. But in the current situation, we hardly had anything. You can see the initial rescue was carried out in boats like the one you are seeing here. The whole state civic infrastructure, the police control room, the secretariat, the high court, the major offices were all flooded. You can see the picture above is where our important state setup was, and the picture below shows what happened to this infrastructure during the floods. I remember the former Chief Minister Umar Saab saying that for 24 hours he was not able to reach even his Chief Secretary, who incidentally was there in the city at a higher reach. He had secured himself. 2 minutes. Can't help it, doesn't work. Yeah, this is another picture of the floods. Now let's go to the main subject, which is how can this be mitigated? Whatever has happened, and in paucity of time, one can't say much on the ground situation. We are a very land scarce area, and therefore floodplains or part of the floodplains perhaps will have to be secured from floods for housing, for which a proper strategy has to be developed. A major wetland rehabilitation program has to be taken up, which will also perhaps mean redistribution of water and construction of water channels, because these wetlands are interconnected as well. Desilting of rivers, because with this degrading of catchment areas, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of silt comes to these water bodies, and these water bodies lose the capacity to carry water. Therefore, desilting also is very essential, which is a soil conservation effort, not directly related to flood, but very critical to the flood. For all disasters, early warning systems have become very critical. And we have learned very hard way that non-existence to a large extent of these early warning systems have cost us a lot. And that is something which needs to be placed immediately. Central Water Commission, which normally assesses or monitors floods, has in 2014 said that they don't cover rivers in Kashmir. Now I am told some movement has taken place in that direction as well. And rescue operations have really got delayed. Therefore, a response has to be built by which we have a proper mechanism of developing rescue operations. For the first days, 4 days, we didn't have even boats to rescue people. Dewatering in the colonies which you saw were flooded was something which perhaps we were totally unequipped to deal with. We got some pumps from Visakhapatnam to dewater a colony in Srinagar or some colonies in Srinagar, but I was told that when these pumps arrived in Srinagar, we didn't have pipes to carry water from the dewatering pump to the river. So even though the river waters had receded, colonies in Srinagar still remain underwater for another 20 days. So technology is something which perhaps would have answers for many of the problems we have. So there was total communication breakdown which needs to be addressed. In the end, one doesn't have a very happy story to tell you. Not much has happened over the past 1.5 years. We have hardly learned the lessons which we would have, or even though we know now largely what the issues are, not much is being done to address these issues the way they need to be. One only hopes and wishes that events like this create some kind of awareness in the planners, within and outside the state, and we arrived at a situation where early warning systems, rehabilitation, restoration of catchment areas, restoration of water bodies, which perhaps are major interventions which could prevent disasters like the one we had in 2014. Thank you.
We've hardly learned any lessons, is I think the most important and operative part of what Saleem Sahab said. And now invite Nityanand Jayaraman to give us a sense of what we went through and what lessons we have and have not learned. Nitya.
Can I have my presentation up, please? So while we're waiting for that to go on, I would like to first thank all of you who are part of the relief efforts. This is a time when citizens rose up to the occasion and gave me faith that anarchy was not just possible, it was being demonstrated, where it was largely an effort where people coordinated with themselves, innovated, and helped each other. This is also a time when many people learned that they had neighbors and actually had a chance to look into their houses and see what it looked like. I hope it doesn't take another flood to get us there. I would also particularly like to thank the fisher folk who often are not looked upon very favorably, and most importantly the youth who rose to the occasion, and the conservancy workers who were left with the dirty job of cleaning up all the garbage that has come to symbolize what we call progress and development. A commonality between Chennai and Srinagar is both of us are in the floodplains. And one of the things that's been said often is that the Chennai floods were a natural disaster that was caused by unprecedented rains. The use of the word natural disaster at a time when there is nothing natural about nature itself is a bit of a problem. Disasters or natural events become disasters when there is loss of human life or human property. So water coming and going is not a disaster until it enters a house. The word unprecedented that's been used again shows a very poor understanding of what nature is all about. It's a meaningless word, particularly in these times when we have this specter of climate change hanging over us. Unprecedented means never happened before. The earth has been around for about 4.5 billion years. The settled human civilization has been around for about 10,000 years. Chennai's rain records extend to about slightly more than 200 years. And in this 200 years of data, trying to average average nature's behavior, and saying that what happened this year was a once in a 100-year flood is a bit of a joke. And also when you say it's a once in a 100-year flood to explain the damage that was caused, the question that arises is, for what kind of a duration are you building your city? Are you building your city to last until the next assembly election? Or is it something that is more longer lasting? Chennai is a coastal city. It's in the floodplains. It's on the edge of an extremely high energy coastline. And so it is not just rains. I mean, this is the season of rains, which turn into floods. It could have been a cyclone as well, because this is the time when the cyclones come. But very soon we'll have the next disaster, which is a heat wave, and then we go into drought. And so we have cycles of shocks that we can expect. In May, we can definitely expect a heat wave. And are we not just flood-proofed or rain-proofed? Are we heat-proofed? Are we drought-proofed? Are we cyclone-proofed? These are things that one needs to look at. What Chennai came with is a whole bunch of natural shock absorbers. You have there the estuary, trees, forests, sand dunes, and inland water bodies. And now all these things are being dismantled. These infrastructure for survival is being replaced by infrastructure of commerce, and particularly of big commerce. So you have these kinds of estuaries which are now recipients of our drainage, industrial effluents, garbage, and construction debris. The dunes are being flattened to host resorts, ports, five-star hotels. The trees are gone because we need wide roads, and the lakes are being converted into engineering colleges. So, there are many reasons that are given for why a natural event became a national disaster. And I'm going to focus on the third one, which is encroachments. And when you look at this word encroachment, it's a very curious word. There is a legal interpretation of that word, which has nothing to do with the location. License is all that matters. So for instance, in November, there was the road that was proposed in Bombay, the Sea Link, was illegal. And it was an encroachment if it had been constructed, because the law did not permit it. But then the people who are road builders are very powerful people. So they go and influence the law. And a Minister of Environment is a very amicable person. He usually complies. So he changed the law. So what was illegal in November is now legal, and the road is permitted. That's a human encroachment. Human encroachment we don't have to worry about. It's a very technical issue. Natural law is very different, because nature cannot be bribed. It cannot be cheated. You cannot plead to it. You cannot say you want to develop, or that you are this or you are that. So in this, the license is immaterial. Your location is all that matters. What we saw earlier in Mr. Beg's presentation is the Secretariat, the High Court, the Lordships, and the elected representatives were all underwater because they had built without paying attention to the natural law. Again, continuing on these encroachments, there are different kinds of encroachments. There are the elite encroachments, and these encroachments are big concrete steel structures. These kinds of encroachments have the power to deflect the water and cause damage to the city, but they will not be evicted because it is unfair, it is impractical. Where will those people go? And these kinds of questions about viability come up. These are the encroachments of the poor. They are encroachments for survival. Because the city has given them no place to stay in higher ground, they go to the margins of the rivers, margins of the roads, margins of the sea, and so they call them marginalized. And these are a threat to themselves, and they will be evicted. This is Singara Chennai. For those of you who don't understand Tamil, Singaram means beautiful. And the whole idea behind Singara Chennai is to improve the infrastructure and develop the city so it's beautiful. And my contention is that it is infrastructure and development that has caused the disaster. This is Chembrambakam, a much maligned water body, but it also supplies water to a greater part of Chennai. And that is Chembrambakam in 2002. And if you notice that part is a place which sends water to the lake. The more brown you see, the better, because the soil has the ability to absorb the water and prevent runoff, and so it takes a longer time to fill this huge water body. Now we have the Detroit of India. This is the Hyundai factory sitting right over there, and who knows what we're drinking? Maybe a little bit of a car. This is the Sholinganallur area. What you see over here is all the Pallikarnai marshland, which used to be 50 square kilometers about 35 years ago, and used to drain 250 square kilometers of catchment. The catchment hasn't changed. This 50 square kilometers is now less than 5 square kilometers. And over here, we have the Elcott SEZ in Sholinganallur, which is all underwater. This is a Pallikarnai marshland, again, an IT explosion. We talk about explosions claiming lives. This explosion has claimed a lot of lives. It's claimed a lot of property. It is called the IT explosion, which is much welcomed in Chennai. And that, again, has taken the northern portion. So the Elcott SEZ was only able to kill the southern portion of the marshland. So we had a new scheme over here and had the northern portion. There's a very big, nice, spanking building called Chennai 1, which was underwater, which has come up over here. And it hosts many of the big companies that actually extended checks to the Chief Minister for the relief fund, which I see as a penalty, not as a corporate social responsibility for what they've done. This is Taramani. I can't show you what's over here. I think even the PowerPoint found it too shocking. But if you look at this place, there's a water body here. There's a water body. That's the IIT campus. So this entire area is a knowledge corridor. And this is where Tidal Park is. So what you see as a water body is where the Tidal Park is. So we had our substation going underwater and exploding because we had located ourselves in a water body. What is interesting is this is the knowledge industry. These are the smart people building in water bodies. This is Kodingayur, and that's again a 1970 map which shows a huge lake, and here we see a sea of humanity. Velachery, and this is big because Velachery in 2005 was not as flooded. But Velachery in 2005 was not like this. This is an eri or a lake. And this eri does not have any water. There is some water left over here. We don't know whether things have changed since the last time this photograph was taken from the satellite. But the entire area was underwater because it's part of a water body. This is again a different view, kind of a zoom out view of Velachery. You have that lake over here, which is now reduced. And over here is the MRTS station. And this is my argument, that it is the infrastructure of commerce that has destroyed our ability to withstand nature's shocks. This is Siruseri, again, IT, SEZ, another explosion that killed us. This is an area, if you notice it, is a very beautiful looking place. It looks like tentacles of an octopus with white colors around. The white is sand, able to absorb a lot of water. And the fact that the tentacle extend north, west, and south mean that this place is a very dangerous place. It collects water from all these areas, converges over here, and dumps it into the Kovalam Creek. We decided to build a Chennai Mathematical Institute and other smart people's places in this area. Yeah. So what can be done about Chennai? Not much. I think we can have better relief, better rescue. But what can be done about the areas around is avoid repeating the same mistakes in places where there are water bodies. It's not a good idea to build on water bodies. Even if you need electricity, I think don't build your power plant in a place that is surrounded by water bodies. You can live without electricity, as we did a little while ago, but you can't live without water. This is happening in Ennur, which is the northern part of Chennai. Northern part of Chennai is usually invisible, but all the good stuff for Chennai comes from the north. Our electricity comes from the north, petroleum comes from the north, the paints come from the north, and we dump our garbage in the north. So north is a very important part of this place, but north also has a very lovely backwater network. And now the Kamaraj port is busy building on it. And we've complained to the government. There is no action being taken because there's a mini Navaratna unit, which means they cannot be touched. That is the Buckingham Canal, or was. Now it looks like a highway to hell. And I will end this with, there's often, we hear learned judges and the Minister of Environment often saying, environment and development must go hand in hand, must balance. The fact of the matter is, environment will not do any balancing. Thank you.
It's extraordinary how developmental greed not only causes, but actually follows floods also. Not very long ago, or not very many days ago, there was an extraordinary advertisement in Chennai, on one of the leading dailies, which said, "We did not get flooded. We are high-rise. Join us. Follow our example." This followed the floods. Professor Janakarajan.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Hindu for giving me this opportunity to make this presentation. I am proud to be part of this Delight for Life Festival. Much has been said already about the floods in Chennai, and in fact, the experience of the Kashmir and experience of Chennai is not going to be completely different. And basically, the essence of my presentation is going to be that, are we negotiating with the nature? And if you negotiate, what will be the kind of consequences? That's the essence of my presentation. In fact, I titled my presentation as a flood in Tamil Nadu as a disaster or an opportunity. Basically, if you look at it, for Chennai, flood is not something unknown. We have seen many floods in the past, but basically it's a kind of mindless expansion of the city which has been responsible for this kind of flood and also encroachments in the drainage system. And most importantly, I would say that the development agenda, which is unidirectional, has been fundamentally responsible for this kind of emergence of flood. And also we have an utter lack of respect for fundamentals of this city. For any city, the fundamentals should be to keep your drainage system intact. But then, we have completely destroyed our drainage system, and also we don't respect the warnings, weather forecasts. And there are multiple reasons of this kind have contributed to this kind of flooding. And so if you look at it, for Chennai, we have experienced several floods almost every 10 years. Look at the 76, we have flood, 85, 96, and 2005. In fact, 2005, we had 40 centimeters of rainfall in 24 hours. And in each one of these occasions, quite a lot of water were flowing in all the four major rivers and drains in the city. In fact, if you look at the 2005, the latest one, before 2015, we had something like 60,000 cusecs crossed the Adyar River, and also Coombe carried 19,000 cusecs. So, in fact, even in 2005, the water was touching the Saidapet bridge. Therefore, what you have experienced in 2015 is not something unknown. It's not something new. So, we have seen many such floods. Therefore, we haven't learned any lessons. That's the main reason. And if you look at all other cities in the country, and including Srinagar, it is one of the main reasons for the flood is the encroachments. The encroachments, in fact, it could be definitely. I agree with Nityanand. It is also legal and illegal, and converting illegal encroachment into legal encroachments. And then in a way you are trying to negotiate with the nature, and that has resulted in this kind of, sorry, I think something wrong with this. Okay. So in order to understand the flood, we have to understand three main things. One, the rainfall pattern and the characteristics of the monsoons, the upstream, downstream watersheds and ecology, and the drainage system. These, I would think, are the fundamentals. But we don't seem to be having any clear knowledge about our monsoons. If southwest monsoon is very gentle, northeast monsoon has always been very, very erratic and irregular and violent. In fact, in all the northeast monsoon period between October and November, we have been hearing Ramanan saying that there is going to be a cyclone, there is going to be a depression, or there is going to be a low pressure area, or a persisting low pressure area, which brings rainfall. Therefore, the rainfall during northeast monsoon has always been not well spread out, and it is a heavy downpour in a few days. So therefore, do we have any kind of a mechanism to handle that kind of rainfall is a key question. Secondly, we haven't understood our upstream, particularly the Tiruvallur-Kanjipuram district. The flood that occurred in Chennai is not because of the rainfall that occurred in Chennai alone. Water comes from the upstream, particularly Tiruvallur and Kanjipuram. There is a gentle gravity from the upstream to the downstream. Water that occurs in the two adjoining districts has to come to the city and then to the Bay of Bengal. But then when we abstract this flow of water in this region, naturally the city gets flooded. And our drainage system is one of the fantastic drainage systems we have in the Chennai city. We got on the north Kosasthaliya River, and the central Chennai you got a Coombe River, on the south you got a Adayar River, and the further south you got a Palar River. Cutting across all the four, you got a 460 kilometers length Buckingham Canal. No other city in the country has this kind of a fantastic drainage system. But we have destroyed it completely. We have destroyed, encroached, and silted up, and the mouth of the river near the Bay of Bengal is completely clogged with the sandbars. We have no respect for our drainage system, and that is why we have suffered. Okay, if you look at the rainfall in Chennai city and in the adjoining districts, you will see that we have received almost 1,200 millimeters of rainfall in most of the years. So the average rainfall itself is something like 1,300 millimeters. So Chennai city is not starving for water. We have been getting a lot of rainfall, but still we have failed to utilize that rainfall. We always complained about the heavy rainfall and a few days, and then there's a 80% runoff, but then we have wasted. Whereas in Jaipur city, the rainfall is 500 and 550 millimeters, and Jaipur is not considered the thirstiest city in the country, whereas Chennai is. That is why we have resorted to desalination plants. Isn't it actually a kind of a paradoxical? In a city where the rainfall is over 1,300 millimeters, and you have desalination plants. You let lot of water go into the sea, and then same water is then desalinated and then let into for drinking. And we spent billions of rupees in that kind of treatment plants. It's really shameful. And so, this graph very clearly shows that in the last 60 years, only in 1 year, rainfall was less than 700 millimeters. As you can see, in most of the years, the rainfall has always been more than 1,200 millimeters. And look at the upstream. Yes, if you look at the upstream in the two adjoining districts, we got a lot of tanks, irrigation tanks. This is Kanjipuram, 1,942. This is Tiruvallur, 1,686. Put together, you got something like 3,600 tanks in the upstream alone. The water that occurs in this region, if you can tap all the water in these water bodies in the two adjoining districts, you can never have any kind of drink water problem. But at the same time, you can mitigate the flood so easily. But we have failed to do that. Most of these tanks are encroached, clogged, and silted up, and completely neglected. And then look at this drainage system in the two adjoining districts. So complex. We have destroyed this drainage system. So much of water bodies, so much of canal network, so much of streams and the drainage system. And because we have occupied, and this is 85% urban, these two districts are 85% urban, which means completely constructed, but then destroying the entire drainage system. That is why this flood. Yes, okay. I'll take one. This is a metropolitan area, and in this metropolitan area, we got 142 tanks. The present CMA itself, we got 142 tanks, and then unfortunately, most of them are in a very bad shape. So all that I'm trying to say is that unless we really respect our fundamentals, unless we respect our water bodies and the natural drainage system, these floods are going to become worse. And in the days to come, as predicted by the International Panel on Climate Change, These floods are going to be much more regular, not once in 10 years, it's going to be once in 5 years. Therefore, it is better we make the fundamentals correct rather than making our city smarter. That is, the smart city is not something which results in high-rise buildings and connectivity, but smart city is one where you have all the fundamentals right. Thank you.
Could the signposters tell us how many seconds or minutes we have for questions? It's a wrap. Can we take one question, just one question, to any of the three panelists? Mr. Sriram Panchu.
Would any of our speakers, especially Professor Janakarajan and Mr. Jayaraman, like to comment on the charge that water from the Chembrabakam Lake, the release was delayed by 3 days because the Chief Secretary delayed giving the order and the Chief Secretary could not contact the Chief Minister to get her instructions. Would you like to comment?
Actually speaking, on the 1st December, the water that was released from Chembrabakam was to the extent of 29,000 cusecs. And that was the maximum they can release, not more than that. And they maintained, as per the Chief Secretary's statement, they always maintained 10% less than the full tank level. And then, so when there was a heavy inflow, they had to open it, and so they opened the entire sluice gates, which resulted in 29,000 cusecs release of water. But then at the point of Saidapet Bridge, water released was 106,000 cusecs of water, as per the NRSC, National Remote Sensing Center's hydrograph, which clearly shows that you realized 106,000 cusecs of water. That is because the Adayar River receives water from many other tanks in that cluster. There are about 30 to 35 tanks in that cluster. All the tanks were already overflowing. And so you only added to that kind of a flood. So that is the main reason. So I won't entirely say that the flood occurred only because of the release of water from Chembrabakam. But at the same time, I must say that they never had any kind of a crisis management. They followed the conventional law of I will maintain up to the 10% less than the full tank level, and if there is a heavy inflow, I will open the whole thing. That's a stupid management of water, and you should have thought about releasing water gradually, which means they should really revise their compendium of rules. They should have what is called a crisis management, which they don't have.
I would just add to it saying that I don't think this would be hair splitting. There might have been a problem with the Chembrabakam, but I can say that even with 50 millimeters of rain, that's about a tenth of what fell on December 1, our city goes under. So we must explore why that happens. Thank you.
So on behalf of the three panelists, thank the audience here today for having allowed us to experience and revisit what was one of the most traumatic, but also perhaps one of the most instructive experiences of our time. Thank you.